To say I've been happily married for 2 years is almost a lie. I adore my husband, but there's something that effectively ruins our relationship. His daughter. I don't want to sound like I'm the stereotypical evil stepmother. I'm not. And in many ways, Fair is a very sweet girl. She's always outdoors, finding animals to play with. A cute quirk she's had since she was a child was to sing at the birds until they came to her, my husband tells me. And it seemed to work. Robins flood the tree in the garden during winter, and we even have the occasional swan wander over to our house. We live, I should add, in the center of a city. There are some patches of wilderness behind our estate, where Fair spends a lot of her time. Too much, in fact. In the past year, she's taken an interest in traps, snares, nets, that sort of thing. Her father even bought her a hunting knife for Christmas. The way she smiled was simply terrifying, if I'm honest, and the fact that she now brings it with her into the woods does nothing to soothe my nerves. I've tried to mention it to my spouse, but he seems determined to overlook any sign of his daughter's, abnormality. He is also determined to ignore the rotting smell that seems to emanate from her room and the reports of missing cats in the local neighborhood. I don't want to rock the boat, but I'm convinced it was her. I think part of the problem is that everyone thinks she looks too innocent. Dark hair, big eyes, pale skin. She's like something out of a fairy tale. But to me, only one word echoes around my head when I look at her. Nightmare. She looks like a dead thing, some sort of preserved princess from 500 years ago. No one else seems to see it, and if I'm honest, I began to fear for my sanity the past couple of years. How could any sensible adult actually be scared of a teenager? But last week, I had all my subconscious suspicions confirmed. My husband has been away on a business trip. I always hate being alone in the house with Fair, but it was unavoidable. Besides, work usually meant that I always arrived home late, so it's not like we've had to eat together and play happy families or anything. I give her space, she gives me mine. It works. But any illusion of normalcy shattered last Friday. I'd forgotten some files at home, important ones, as always, and had to turn around and go back home to collect them. I thought Fair was at school, as I'd always been told that she went to school. Though now I can remember that I was never actually told which school, and never saw her do homework, or get on a bus, or go on a trip, or hang out with a friend. It's like her life is in the woods. It's the only place in 2 years that I've actually seen her go. I used to think she went there to seek some sort of solace. I justified her weird habits with just wanting to escape and have her own space. I should add that Fair doesn't talk. At all. She can sing, I suppose, but apart from that, she doesn't really communicate. I tried to take it in my stride, but the silence, when it was just the two of us, hurt my ears. Anyhow, I left work that day to pick up the files. It was scarcely noon and the sun shone high in the sky. I was annoyed, getting stuck in traffic, not being able to drink the coffee that waited on my desk, the general discomforts of sitting in a car, and my bad mood seemed to hover over everything I passed on the drive home. Occupants of other cars were more aggressive. Birds seemed to swirl threateningly in the sky. Clouds moved across the horizon, and I could hear a distant thunderclap as it started raining. Gray pedestrians walked at the edges of my vision, and my focused tapping on the steering wheel grew louder. I thought I was going to snap. The base of my neck buzzed. I pulled into the driveway of my home sharply, wrenching the wheel to avoid the mangy cat that darted from underneath the bushes by the porch. For a second, everything was fine. The tension eased, and I felt myself relax. I knew this house. It was mine, and it was comfortable. I was too distracted to notice that the front door had already been unlocked. In my head, I was locating the files, which briefcase, which desk, which room. There were perhaps 5 seconds of standing in the hallway before my train of thought derailed. A thick coppery tang seemed to hang in the air. Had something died in the vents? I took 1, then 2 steps in the direction of the kitchen. From the angle I stood at, I could see clearly in the space I had designed myself. Smooth marble countertops, weathered green cupboards, wide windows garnished with white blinds, covered in what looked like a heaving mass of fur. Fur and blood. My ears gradually focused, and I could hear noises. Yowling, mewing, chirping, squawking, and above it all, something much worse. Chewing. Fair stood in the center of the room, face buried in the stomach of a fuzzy kitten. My brain tried to translate it as something sweet, a cuddly gesture of affection perhaps. But as my stepdaughter raised her head, I saw blood smeared over her face, trickling down her neck onto her neat little blouse. I took 2 steps back, opened the door, quietly left the house, and drove to a nearby viewpoint. I inhaled. I stepped out of the car. I exhaled. I vomited. Wiping my lips with a tissue, I dug my phone out of my purse. Work now seemed distant, and the files I considered so important equally so. I had memorized the phone number, and besides, I was already a respected client of theirs. In the corporate kingdom, it always helps to know a hitman. I didn't climb the corporate ladder by letting old men decide whether I was pretty enough to promote. I got to where I am through hard work and leveling the odds where they needed to be leveled. If you're going to criticize, I recommend spending a day in my heels and evaluating how generous you feel at the end of it. It's been almost a week. She should be dead by now. But as I woke up this morning to go to work, I found something lying outside my bedroom door. A human heart, with a bloodied Polaroid picture lying next to it. I've come to several conclusions. My husband isn't on a business trip. My stepdaughter killed the professional I sent after her. And my stepdaughter isn't human. I don't know what she is, but I've locked myself in my room. The smell of blood is steadily getting stronger, and I can hear her singing from outside my door. The more I listen, the more beautiful it sounds. I want to open the door. I want to hear more of that voice. I'm writing this while I can still think. I love her. She's so beautiful. I want to open the door. Open the door. I love her. I apologize for my mental state yesterday. I don't know how, but I think her singing somehow got to me. I'm not one to throw words like trance around, but that's the best way I can think of to describe it. Heavy, hypnotic. I also want to thank you. I'm currently in my car and no longer enthralled, and I doubt I'd be here if it weren't for the persistence of some of you in challenging my thought process. I'll explain. I sat in my room listening to her for a very long time, all of yesterday afternoon and last night at least. At some point she stopped singing and started squeaking instead. She doesn't talk. I have never heard her talk. At the time I found her voice beautiful, but playing it back in my head, all I can hear is a rough, scraping lilt. A voice like tree bark. The reason I eventually got my senses back was when she started screaming, if you can call it that. One of my eardrums burst, I think. But I do know that I stopped being able to hear. Everything. Even my surroundings seemed muffled. I'd be leaning against the door, distractedly replying to messages on my phone. And when I came to, I was slumped forward, bleeding from my ears but no longer under her spell. I'm not sure why she screamed. I don't think it was pain. I obviously couldn't hear, but I could feel thumps echoing through the house that made me think she was having a tantrum. I also don't know who she was talking to. All I saw, and I know how insane this sounds, was the shadows of hooves through the crack under my door. 2 neat little cloven hooves, and slow replies to Fair's rough voice. I don't know who it was, but they, or it, was outside my door for a very long time. I'm also unsure why neither of them decided to break the door down to fetch me. I'm going to assume that Fair wouldn't want this leaked. I came to my senses, deaf in both ears, and with blood leaking down my neck. I realized that I needed to leave, and leave as quickly as possible. I plugged my ears using the cotton balls I keep on my bedroom table. Thank you for the suggestion. Which both soaked up the blood and made everything feel more fuzzy. I could still feel vague thumping from downstairs. It's an old house, and you can feel every movement and shake throughout the foundations. So I knew I was being ignored, right then at least. I shuffled over to the bedroom window, which was thankfully already open. Closed windows create stuffy rooms, so I make it a habit to keep them open. Tucking my phone into the pocket of my jacket, I was still in my work clothes, yes, even my heels. I checked to see if my wallet was still in the pocket where it should be, Luck wasn't on my side. I remembered leaving it on the kitchen counter last night. My card was in that wallet. If I was going to get out of here successfully, I needed that card. It was my ticket to everything. I could feel thumping directly below me. They were in the living room, the opposite side of the house to the kitchen. I crossed my room, grateful for the thick carpets, and eased the door open as slowly as possible. More thuds from below me. I tiptoed down the hallway, peering down the stairs to the kitchen before I descended. The banister shook in my hand as I descended. She was angry. I slid into the kitchen from the stairs, avoiding the squeaky parts of the floor to the best of my ability, and froze. Someone was stood in the center of my kitchen, facing away from me, a someone with cloven hooves, draped in a long black coat with a hand that concealed any possible outline that could give a clue to the appearance of the figure. I shook on the spot, trying to slowly make my way backwards. In a flash, the creature's hand shot towards me. I flinched, my entire body tensing. I opened my eyes to see my wallet and card keys dangling in front of my face. In my peripheral vision, I could see a chunk of blackness where a face should be. My next breath shook. Slowly, I extended my hand and took hold of my belongings. The thing in front of me pointed at the front door, visible from the kitchen, which stood open. I blinked. It hadn't been open when I snuck down the stairs. I knew that. The creature gestured again, angrily. My feet started moving of their own volition, and I was out the front door and unlocking my car faster than I could feasibly move. Before I could take the time to properly process my own actions, I had started the car and backed out of my driveway. The last thing I saw in the rearview mirror before I turned the corner at the end of our street was a small white figure with dark hair crouched on the pavement outside our home. Red soaked the dress she wore, and despite my deafness, I'm sure I could hear her rage. I'm far away now, and safe. As you might have guessed, my stepdaughter clearly isn't human. I can't remember much of what she was saying to me, but looking at her actions, I'm going to guess she's some sort of vampire, or at least relies on blood. I know I've briefly mentioned her appearance, but let me go into more detail on what I mean when I say she looks dead. Her hair is very, very dark, almost black. It doesn't seem to pick up light. I've never seen it shine, and I've never seen highlights picked out when she's outdoors. It seems melodramatic, but her hair seems like a void, a cardboard cutout of pure color. In childhood photos, she doesn't look the same. You can see strands of gingery gold picked out in photos of her in the sun as a toddler. And you can clearly see that her face is freckled, which has also changed because her skin is dead white. It's like she rolled in chalk. There are no blemishes, no patches of irritated skin, no scars, and definitely no spots. In the 2 years I've lived with this girl, I've never once seen her blush. There's no color in her skin at all. Finally, her mouth. Her mouth freaks me out the most, if I'm honest. I'm aware that it's strange to hear an adult woman describe a teenager's lips in detail, but if you saw her, you would notice. Her lips are crusty in the scabbed, old blood kind of way. They're deep red, and I don't think it's lipstick. I've never actually been in her room. I generally tried to avoid encroaching on her territory, but she doesn't strike me as the makeup type. They also shine, permanently, like a fresh wound. I know it'll sound strange to you, me allowing all these odd details to slip past for 2 whole years. I never wanted to kick up a fuss. My entire working life is arguing, negotiating, taking a stand, and I wanted my marriage to be different. I didn't rock the boat. I didn't ask questions when his daughter was out late, or think too much about the twigs in her hair in the mornings. I decided to let him do the parenting. It wasn't my place to chime in. I focused on my husband and spending time with him, and I'm really beginning to regret it. I feel as though there must be something I'm missing. I'm a logical person, believe it or not, so I'm not jumping to conclusions about what she is, and I'm not going to waste my time debating my own sanity. If you can't trust your own mind, can you trust anything at all? Explanations aside, this is what I know. Fair drinks animal blood. Her voice can somehow draw people and animals to her. She's always in the woods. She was talking last night. I was told she couldn't talk. I've never liked her singing, but yesterday I thought it was beautiful. Yesterday, I genuinely loved Fair. The Fair I know is not the same Fair in those children's photos. She was talking to someone with cloven hooves yesterday. I don't know what she is, but I'm assuming that she feeds off animals she finds in the woods. I was told she went to school. This was probably a lie. I think I can draw a fairly detailed conclusion from all these strands, but they're mostly circumstantial. I need proof. I never thought I'd be the type of person to say this, but I need my husband. He's been lying to me about his daughter for years, and I have to know why. As far as I'm concerned, she's either inhuman or completely insane. What I know for sure is that she's perfectly happy to kill people and is capable of killing hired professionals. I don't want to bring more people into this. Nobody should die that doesn't have it coming. There's also the issue of the dark figure with the hooves. I don't want to speculate on it just now. I don't think I'm ready. But I'm sure of one thing. And I'm not sure how, despite their help, they want me dead. I usually enjoy shopping. Big brands, shiny tags, that wonderful good quality leather smell. I like to look sophisticated, which is definitely not the impression I gave the girl behind the checkout, wielding my basket of iron nails, honey, a hammer, granola bars, chalk, metal filings, a tough metal file, and several energy drinks. I had already called work to inform them that I would be out of the office for a few days. I didn't need to tell them why, and they were too scared to ask. I had also called a chain of people who owed me favors, and had gathered a considerable amount of information of dubious legality. The most important thing I learned was that Fair didn't exist at all. She had no records anywhere. My husband is registered, but there was no mention of a child, let alone a daughter. I checked around for any record of a marriage in his name, hoping to find his ex-wife, and instead found a very interesting series of articles regarding a missing family. A couple and their young daughter vanished from their home, leaving no traces. After a 3-week search and numerous appeals, the wife's body was found in the center of a nearby forest, with her heart torn out. There was a shallow grave near her body, around the size of a child, leading to the official explanation that the husband murdered his wife and child, burying his daughter. Wild animals could then feasibly have dragged the body out of the grave, although this theory didn't explain why the woman's corpse was left alone, or why no remains of the girl were ever found. Simply put, the official explanation is weak. However, the case is considered closed, despite the fact that the culprit was never caught. The official explanation allows for this too, saying that he probably died of exposure in the woods after the double murder. Needless to say, I'm not convinced, mostly because they included photographs alongside the articles. Perhaps the change in appearance is enough to convince the ineffective police in another county, but the photo is unmistakably my husband. I didn't think he committed a double murder 10 years ago, which is exactly why I decided to ask him about it myself after stocking up on supplies, toiletries, and a cheap change of clothes. It's shockingly cheap to access information on where a person has been. Within a very short space of time, I had a list of all the locations my husband had been in the past week, although there was no data from the previous 2 days. That, coupled with the Polaroid picture, led me to his hideout. The Polaroid, by the way, showed an old telephone mast decorated with missing persons photos. A section of a sign belonging to the local car dealership behind the mast is visible, as well as a spire in the distance. The photo looks old but is surprisingly still accurate. I searched up all the locations of my husband's phone and found a small town with a car dealership and a church in close proximity, likely to be the place he was staying. I'm aware that the link is weak, but the Polaroid can be no coincidence, which is why I'm disregarding the logical route in favor of a leap of faith. Special times, special circumstances. Anyhow, I found him relatively quickly. Perhaps it was deliberate. I don't know, and he's not currently in any position to tell me. I drove to the town, the journey taking up most of the morning, pulling into the first fuel shop I could find. I happened to glance up into the greasy cafe attached to the petrol station while filling my car. I didn't rush. I got the sense that he had chosen the window seat so that I could see him. I paid for my fuel, parked the car in a bay, paid the parking fare, and walked into the cafe, sliding into the booth seat opposite him. There was none of that warmth in his face that usually resided there, and his face seemed scrunched. Getting the overwhelming sense that I was living out a scene from a film, I opened my mouth to comment on something. Anything. I was cut off by a low voice as he began to speak. Here's what he told me. 12 years ago, he and his wife had given birth to a little girl, freckled and excitable. His tone softened as he described her red curls, the games she liked to play, the toys they'd bought her. They'd named her Fair. She had died at the age of 2, choking to death on an apple. 10 years ago, that fateful night, a hooded figure had visited the distraught couple, promising to bring her back. His voice broke as he described the scene to me. He walked into the house so late at night, through the locked door. We were terrified, and then we weren't. And then it told us how to get Fair back. Trailing off, he stirred a finger absent-mindedly in the cold coffee sitting in front of him. I don't know how long he'd been waiting. The coffee, such a normal object, seemed to be teasing me with its plainness. What I'd give to rewind and be having the same cup of coffee in our kitchen. I could sense, even then, that the possibility of another morning cup of coffee had already slipped through our fingers like sand at a beach. Breath shuddering, he stared deeply into his coffee and started again. He told us to take her body to the forest. He told us to bury her shallow and then she'd come back. He didn't tell us there was a price. His expression seemed to grow even duller, steeling itself against the memories. Completely lifeless, he told me how the hooded figure had appeared again, how it had pinned Fair's mother to the ground, carving her heart out of her chest with a jutting talon, how my husband had watched in shock as the figure uncovered Fair from her grave, smearing blood on her small face, how Fair's eyes had opened, and how she had devoured her mother's heart with relish, and how her horrified father couldn't bear to kill her. I looked at him, then trying to imagine raising a monster that you couldn't help but love, turning a blind eye to the rotting smell coming from her room. He turned from me, then staring intently out of the window. There's more, and I'm so sorry, but Fair, she needs blood to survive, and she needs hearts to survive. I hoped that she'd kill you while I was away, but you're too smart. He faced me, oblivious to the shock and hurt on my face. Why did you have to make this so damn difficult? The flash of anger on his previously broken face betrayed the twisted mind inside. My husband was insane, and with a jolt I realized that the cafe had emptied while he spoke. It was only us. And Fair, suddenly appearing out of nowhere to stand behind her father, her mouth spread into a slow grin, and I flinched as she started to sing. It was her turn to flinch as I slapped her hard across the face. They blame it all on me, of course. My erratic behavior, lack of logic, everything fits the narrative they want. The evil stepmother, unmasked at last. Of course, I planned my stepdaughter's murder to coincide with my husband being out of town. When she escaped me, I tracked her and her father down in the village where they hid. Nobody questions the inconsistencies, the holes in the tidy little narrative. They just want a villain. An evil, cold villain with the icy heart and the ruthless streak. I suppose I'm lucky in a way. The aforementioned ruthless streak has earned me enough influence to vanish. I've paid my way out, which is what's expected of me, I suppose. I'll use my connections, disappear, be erased, whatever. It doesn't matter. None of it seems to anymore. They can't see that in some aspects of her life, the wicked stepmother has a heart, and that in others, she can't afford to. I suppose you can all see where I'm going. Before I end this, a final update into the void, I'll tell you what really happened in that rundown cafe. It won't match the news reports of the abusive, murderous stepmother that you read. The one that hallucinated her own stepdaughter drinking blood and promptly tried to have her killed. I'm not crazy. I can't believe I'm crazy. Like I said, if you can't believe your own mind, what can you trust? I'm aware I'm rambling. Add it to the list of things I'm sorry for and send it on its way. Yes, I slapped Fair across the face. It's the first time I've ever shown violence towards her, despite what they'll say. Her lips, already permanently swollen and scabbed, split open and blood spattered on the cheerful tiles beneath us. I quickly inserted the tiny wireless earbuds I had clenched in my hand, soundproof ones that would prevent me from being able to hear Fair singing. All I could hear was the uncomfortably loud sound of my own blood thumping through my veins. I raised my head to see my husband lunging towards me, hands outstretched and face twisted into a snarl. Flinging myself to the side, I practically fell out of the booth as Fair spat blood on the ground behind her father's seat. Keeping the table between us, I backed up, reaching into a convenient jacket pocket for my iron hammer. As my husband shimmied out of the booth and lumbered towards me, I swung the hammer as violently as I could, connecting with his head. I couldn't hear, but I could feel. I felt the hard resistance of skull give way to soft brain tissue. I felt the spattering of blood and pulp spray my face. I felt the low, guilty mumble of my conscience. What have I done? I loved that man. And the overwhelming feeling of satisfaction. That bastard wanted me dead. I could also feel Fair scream. I shivered and looked up to see her standing far too close. Tears mixed with the blood on her face, creating a blotched landscape of red on her cheeks, and for a second, I felt hollow. How could I do this to her? That feeling vanished as she crouched, plunged her hands into his chest, raking her nails into his flesh and tearing it open. It was animalistic. I felt the bile rise in my throat as she carefully raised her father's heart into the air, blood still spilling onto the floor like a demented waterfall. The stench hit my nose. It was worse than the smell of decay in her room. It smelled of something that should be alive. She locked eyes with me and maintained eye contact as she tore into a vital piece of her only parent, as though it were nothing but yesterday's leftovers, as though he had never been important to her. Blood flowed from the heart, dripping onto the cutesy floral dress Fair had worn that day. Blood lapped onto my shoes. My stepdaughter smiled at me, baring red teeth. Then she lowered her head to her father's chest and rested it there, a macabre vision of a normally familial gesture, a twisted father and daughter bonding moment. Unfreezing myself, I swung myself at her as she lay there, not sporting, but neither is eating your own parent's heart. The iron hammer had connected with her, brushing along her forearm. I could smell the burning off flesh and imagine the sizzle as the iron burned her skin. Her eyes were open in an instant as she snapped towards me, hands reaching for my neck. I swung again, but she was too close to me for it to work. Her hands were on my throat, and I was already seeing black spots by the time I was able to yank my open tub of metal shavings from my pocket and fling it upwards towards her face. Her face peppered with tiny burning pieces of iron, she fell backwards with her eyes closed, thrashing against the stinging enemy that assaulted her. I stood in front of the entrance for a second, catching my breath and preparing to swing at her one last time. With the earbuds in, I saw the blue lights before I could hear the sirens, and I only heard the sirens because the earbuds fell out as I was tackled to the ground from behind. I found out later that someone had heard the police and reported the screams. The poor daughter watching as her father was beaten to death. The last thing I saw as the police dragged me away, tearing the bloody hammer from my grip, was Fair in her slow, sweet smile. A princess decked in red, lips as red as blood, eyes as red as coals, and hands as red as someone who knows they've just gotten away with murder. They won't prosecute me unless they catch me again. I can't tell you who I doped to or what I gave them, but I can tell you that everything you read will be a lie. It will tell you I'm insane, that I'm delusional, and imagine some fantasy world in which my stepdaughter and husband were evil vampire beings. As you can tell, they didn't believe my rambled, confused explanation of why I beat my husband to death with a hammer. Fair will be fine. They'll listen to her. She's the poor little victim, trapped with an evil witch from a fairy tale. A villain. And we all know that villains don't get happy endings. At least this way the villain at least gets to explain herself. I'm the wicked stepmother, but I don't regret a thing. Thank you for making it this far. I'd like to encourage you to subscribe if you like my content. If you'd like to follow me and want to be involved in what I'm doing / talk to me, follow me on Twitter or Instagram. If you'd like an offline experience, check out the podcast, The Midnight Podcast. And if you're at all inclined, I've got some merch out there to be purchased if you'd like to support the channel. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.